Hey subscribers and watchers, welcome back again to another series of Android advanced tutorials. It's me Said Ali here from Computer Science for Self-Taught, and in this video I'll show you how you can set runtime permissions in your Android app. If I show you my phone and I've already created an app, whenever I want to run this app inside this emulator, so the image that I want to download from the internet, it won't be downloaded. The reason is because we haven't set the runtime permissions. So whenever I click download image, and in here it says permission is denied. So if you go to the settings, I click on my application, you see no permission is granted. Although if you go to the manifest, we have written these permissions here, so it didn't set the permissions. The reason is the user installs the app on Marshmallow or higher versions of Android, so those permissions will only be asked at the runtime permissions. If the user runs your app on older versions of Android, I mean below the Marshmallow versions or older versions, so these two permissions, which is internet and external storage permissions, will be asked from the user at the time of installation. You see, permission is not granted, so this is the reason our app won't work. If I come in here and if I check this mark and if I go back to the app, when I click on download image, you see the image is now downloading. So it is very important that you should set the runtime permissions, and there are some rules that you need to observe that in order to work with runtime permissions. And this is the image which I have downloaded. So let me delete this image. Let's go to Android Studio and click main activity. So these are the rules that I have got from the android.developer.com. The first one is don't check for or request permissions when the user opens your app. So don't ask the permissions immediately. Wait until the user clicks the button. So in here, whenever the user clicks on download image, then at that time the Android system should ask the user to grant the permissions so that your app can start using some properties or characteristics. So do not ask those permissions whenever the user opens your app for the first time. So let's see how can I do this, and let's fix this one. So before I do anything, let me go and uninstall this app, and instead wait until select or open the feature that requires a particular permission. For example, in here you have set the internal storage permission. Okay, do not ask this permission whenever the user opens your app. So wait until the user opens the feature that requires a particular permission. Second, add only permissions that your app needs. Do not add extra permissions that your app doesn't need. Okay, and also make sure that it offers clear benefits to the user. Whenever the user wants to allow the permission, first pop up a dialog box to the user and gives enough info about the permissions that the user is going to give it to your app. And the fourth step is that only the permissions that are defined in the manifest file can be requested at runtime. These are the permissions will be asked at runtime. If you do not write it in here and ask these permissions at runtime, so your app may crash or the system may not grant the permissions to your app. So this is the method of the button. Okay, whenever the user clicks on the download button, and this is the method of download image, which I have already handled in here. So in here we are gonna ask the user to grant the permission. The first thing that you really need to know that how we can ask those permissions. First, check if the permission is already granted or not. How can we do that? So inside the if, I use the context compat, click OK, and call the check self permission. And the first parameter, it requires the context. So as we are now inside the main activity, I pass the main activity as the context, and the next thing is the permissions you want to check. So I use the manifest file. There are two import methods. One is manifest Android and manifest java.util.jar. Make sure that you import the manifest Android. Okay, I click on this, and also which permission you want to request, and I write external storage. So if the permission is already granted, the check self permission returns permission granted. So how can we check that? And I check that in here, and I use the package manager, and I call the permission granted, and I open the brackets here. Let me minimize this. So if the permission is granted, start the work. Otherwise, else if here the context compact.check self permission will return permission granted. If the permission was granted and it was equals to the permission granted, start the work. Otherwise, come in here. In here, call the activity compact dot show request permission rational, and the first parameter is main activity dot this, and the next parameter is your permissions. Manifest dot permission dot write external storage. Whenever the user clicks on the download image, it's gonna check if the permission is granted already or not. If the permission is granted, so start the work of downloading. If the permission was not granted, come to else. And in here, this method should-show-request-permission rational returns false if the app is open for the first time. Make sure that you call this method on activity compact class. If the user opens your app for the second time, so this method will return true, and you should do something in here. So if it is the first time and the permission was not granted, so the activity should-show-request-permission returns you false. So you must request the permission from the user to grant the permission so the app can start working. So how can you do that? So again, I use the activity compact and I call the request permissions, and the first parameter is the context, so I pass the main activity as context, and the second parameter is permissions that you want to request from the user. So it must be inside an array of a string, and in here you must write the permission, and I say manifest.permission write external storage, and at the end you must pass a request method. I'm going to create another variable in here as the name of a static variable, and I've already created one, permission storage, which is 19. So I'm gonna put it in here, permission storage. Okay, if the permission is granted, so come and call the method if URL is not null, and if the permission was not granted, so the else if statement will be executed, and in here the should-show-request-permission will return false if the app is open for the first time, and it returns true if the app opens for the second time. If the app opens for the first time, so this part will return false, and now we are on the activity compact.request permission. So we are here and we ask the user to grant the permission. In order to control the situation on permissions, call the onRequestPermission result, and in here you must check that if the permission is granted or not in here, and I say if the request code, which is this one, this is the request code which we have set in here. If the request code was equals to the permission storage code, so this is the request that we have sent to the system, and in here you must also check that if the permission is granted or not, and in here I say if the grant result, so this is the permission, if the permission was granted, so that permission will be passed to this array of integer. So in here I say if the grant result, if the length was greater than 0, it means that there is something inside the grant result, and also check that if the grant result index 0, if the permission is granted or not. So if the permission is granted, so execute the task. If the permission is denied, toss a message to the user and say permission denied. Okay, so if the permission is granted, so I'm gonna call this method to execute the task for me, and I call if the permission is granted, so call the if URL is not null. Okay, so in here, okay, put your work that you want to be executed whenever the user grants the permission to your app. If the user didn't grant the permission, so come to the else statement and execute this part of code and say permission denied. And also in here I toss a message to the user that the permission is granted. Okay, permission grant. So if it is the second time the user clicks on the download button, so you must show a dialog to the users and give enough info about the permissions that the user is gonna allow that by using a dialog. And in here I create a new dialog, alert dialog called the builder, and it requires a context, and I pass the main activity .this a context, and I call .set title required, and in here I set the message and I say grant the permission to store the downloaded image to storage, and make sure that you set a positive button, and I say grant permission and provide a click listener, new on click listener, and in here again I call the activity compact.request permission, pass the context, and also pass the permissions that you wanna ask from the system, and I say manifest.permission dot write external storage, and also pass the request code and write permission storage. Okay, and in here if the user don't want to do that, so again you must set a negative button, and I say no thanks, and in here I have to set an on click listener, and in here dismiss the dialog, and at the end show the dialog to the user. So let's run the app for the first time and see what happens if we don't grant the permission. Okay, let me just comment these things, okay, and I call if URL is not null. So let me run this. As you can see, whenever I click on the download image button, so it tells me that the permission is not granted or the permission is denied. You see, the permission is denied, and we haven't set the runtime permission, and that is the reason when you come to the setting, go to the app, and you see no permission granted. So if I remove this app, so now we are gonna grant the permissions. I mean the runtime permission, okay? So let's run and see what happens. Click run. Observe the emulator in here. So now when I click on the download image, it's going to check the permission in here. If the context compact.check self permission, if the permission for the storage is already granted, so this method is going to return permission granted, and then I compare that return result to this permission granted. If the permission was granted, so it will execute our task. Otherwise, it comes to the else statement, and in here it checks if activity compact.should show request permission rational. If it is the first time that the user asks the storage permission, so this method will return false. If it is the first time the Android system asks the user to grant the permission. And if it is the second time that the user clicks on the download image, so this is the second time, so this method will return true, and these lines of code will be executed. Okay, if it is the first time, it will return false, and it will come to the else, and in here it asks the user to grant the permission. If the user granted the permission, so we come in here, we have got the permission storage, I mean the request code that I've got in here, and in here it checks that if the grant result was greater than 0, and if what the permission is granted or not. So if the permission is granted, so it says permission is granted, otherwise it will say permission denied. So let me click on download image. Right now no permission is granted, so it's gonna come to the else statement and ask the user to grant the permission. So let's click the button. Bam, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. It says allow my application to access photos, media and files on your device. So if I click allow, our task will start working, and if I click deny, so in here the permission is not granted, so this method will return false, and it says, and it comes to the else part, and it says permission denied. So let's deny it. There you go, permission denied. So now if I click on the download image button, so it is the second time that we ask the user to grant the permission. So if I click, and it comes in here if the permission is granted or not. If the permission is not granted, so it comes to the else if statement. And in here should request permission rational, will check if it is the first time or the second time. If it is the first time, this method will return false, and it will come to the else part. And if it is the second time the user clicks on the download image button, so this method will return true, and this dialog will appear, and the title of that dialog is permission required, and the message is grant permission, this one, and two buttons will be there. One is at the name of grant permission. If you click on the grant permission, so again you will ask the system to provide you, and again it will ask the user to provide the permission. And if you click on the no thanks button, so the dialog will be dismissed. Let's click it. Bam, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. It is the second time that I click on the download image, so that's why the activity compact.should request permission rational returns true. And if I click on no thanks, again if it is the third time or fourth time, the activity compact.should permission rational will return true, and it says that these permissions are required. If I click no thanks, and if I click on the download image, and in here if I click on grant permissions, so this dialog will appear again. So if I click don't show ask again in here and click deny, so whenever the user clicks on the download button again, so the activity compact.should request permission returns false, and the else statement won't be executed. Okay, let me just allow the permission, and let's see what happens now. If I click allow, so the permission is granted. The system will toss a message that the permission is granted, and our work will start working. Let's see. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Permission granted, and our task is working in the background. So once it's finished, it says the image has downloaded successfully. Let's see if it tells us the truth or not. There you go. This is the image that we have downloaded. Let's check out the system setting, and let's go to my application. There you go, guys. The permission to the storage is granted. So let's uninstall the app again. Let me rerun the app, and in this time we are gonna check the box that we have set here. So it is the first time I deny it. now the dialog will appear. So if I click again, if I click deny and the user clicks on the download button, the permission won't be requested from the user. Let's click deny. Okay, permission denied. Let's click on the download image. There you go, permission denied. So this brings us to the end of this particular tutorial, and if you have any questions, just let me know in the comment box below this video and I will answer them ASAP. So make sure that you check out my next video. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Have fun learning. Peace out.